Welcome back. President Trump is threatening to shut down the southern border as soon as this week. And while acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan says the Pentagon has not been consulted about supporting a closure, the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen announced today that she's reassigning hundreds of Customs and Border Protection agents to, quote, address the influx of migrants in some areas. This is not the first time the president has threatened to shut the border, but Republicans are divided on whether he'll make good on the threat this time around.
He would, but there is a crisis at the border, and this is what we have to understand. 100,000 people just last month.
I think he's trying to get their attention. This is something that would clearly hurt them, but in the end of the day, if you ask me, I think it's going to happen. I don't.
With me now is Jeh Johnson, Homeland Security Secretary during the Obama administration. Jay, it's good to see you. How difficult would it be to actually shut down the southern border? Is it possible?
Katie, you don't have to be the former Secretary of Homeland Security to know that you cannot shut down a 1,900-mile border. It's a little like decreeing that it should stop raining. At most, the president can arguably legally shut down ports of entry, the bridges that go in and out of Laredo, Texas, or El Paso, for example. But to do that, the effect of that would be principally to close down lawful immigration and lawful commerce. Mexico is a huge trading partner of ours, and commerce goes in and out of Mexico to the United States on a daily, hourly basis. And so to close the ports of entry, the bridges, would simply be driving away from the ports of entry those migrants that we've been encouraging to go to ports of entry to claim asylum, driving them to the land borders between the ports of entry to cross illegally. We will know less about those who are entering our country, and in the meantime, hurting lawful immigration and hurting lawful commerce. So I don't think it's a very good idea, and common sense ought to tell you that it's not a good idea. It sounds good in practice. It sounds like a nifty thing to do, but you cannot close a 1,900-mile border.
But can you understand why is the president tweeting this? Is it a oversimplification of what happens down there? Is it an overreaction? why this executive authority tweet?
I know this. 100,000 migrants in a month is a crisis. It's a crisis in Central America. It's a crisis for our border security personnel to try to deal with that. And it's a crisis for the communities along the border that have to somehow absorb this population. This is the equivalent of the city of Albany, New York, all of a sudden showing up on your southern border. Now, the question becomes what to do about it. And there are no easy, quick fixes to this problem. You have to address the underlying situation in Central America.
Which is what?
Push factors, the poverty and violence in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. The push factors, and I know this from personal experience owning this problem for 3 years, the push factors are the principal drivers of illegal migration. We can do things on our southern border to try to deter it, which will have, at best, a short-term effect. But as long as the underlying conditions in Central America continue to persist, we're going to be dealing with this problem over and over again.
This administration wants to cut aid to these countries, right?
That's the exact wrong thing to do. We started with an investment of $750 million in FY16, and I'm told by people within DHS that the modest amounts that we've invested, rightly with a lot of strings attached, are beginning to have a positive impact. And we need a sustained political commitment to keep at that.
Why are we seeing the sudden rise in these numbers, the crisis now? Why in 2019?
That's a good question. Coyotes, the smugglers, will often put out messages in Central America, like, a used car sale expiring at the end of the week. Will offer a discount, or they'll be putting, in 2014, we learned anecdotally that the coyotes were telling migrants, the Border Patrol are giving out free permisos, free passes, if you get there in the next 30 days. And so very often there's a new message, and it has a snowball effect. And clearly, what this administration is doing now is not working, because we're seeing numbers higher than anything I saw, higher than anything in the last 12 years. And there's something driving this that is causing a bit of a frenzy in Central America. And it is very definitely a crisis. And the question is, what do you do about it?
How much is this administration contributing to it by telling people to go to the ports of entry, but then slowing down access to cross those ports, and then by sending people back to Mexico to apply for asylum there as opposed to applying in the
Well,
U.S.?
clearly, if you tell people, go wait at the bridge, and you do that as a deterrent, sooner or later, that's going to burst. And people are going to give up, and they're just going to cross the land border. We talked about, in the prior administration, asking Mexico to hold people in Mexico while they have pending claims in the U.S., but you can only do that in a limited amount. You can't take 30,000, 40,000 people a year, send them back to Mexico, and then expect them all to show up at their deportation proceeding in the United States when they're ordered to do so. We don't have the buses, the logistics to do that. And so, again, this requires a long-term investment to deal with the underlying problem. There are things we can do. There are smart investments we can make in border security, but you have to make an investment in the underlying problem.
So the AP is reporting just now that Donald Trump is considering adding an immigration czar to coordinate the president's policies across various federal agencies. Would an immigration czar, and it's a kind of a nebulous idea, I guess, right now, would something like that help streamline
We actually already
the
have an
process?
immigration czar. It's called the Secretary of Homeland Security.
There you go.
In 2014, when we had a spike in migration, I was very definitely the focal point of dealing with that issue, with the support of a lot of other agencies. But enforcement and administration of our immigration laws is the responsibility of the Secretary of Homeland Security.
If you were there today...
Every once in a while, an interagency czar is a good idea. For example, the Ebola crisis, you may remember that. And we needed somebody to coordinate an interagency effort. But this type of situation, I think it should be the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Is this a PR move? Because he likes the words immigration and czar?
You're asking me to interpret this White House? I'm not sure I could do that.
Okay, fine. If you were there today and you were advising this president, what would you say to get through to him to address the crisis in a way that you think would be effective?
Make aid to Central America. Cutting off aid is the exact wrong thing to do. Work with the government of Mexico to help them secure their southern border. One of the ways we drove the numbers down in 2014 was to work constructively with the Mexican government to get them to secure their southern border. It's a smaller border. It's a more discrete border with Central America. And it actually had an impact. For about a year and a half, the numbers after they put that in place on our southern border were the lowest that we'd seen since the 1970s. And so establishing alternate paths, alternate safe legal paths for migrants who are desperate to leave Central America. It's basically fleeing a burning building, giving other countries in the region the apparatus and the wherewithal to set up refugee resettlement processes and making the investment in eradicating the poverty and violence. We've done this before, Plan Colombia. It can be done, but it requires a sustained effort. There are always things you can do for border security, smart investments in border security, surveillance, roads, planes, fence, maybe wall in places where it makes sense. But this administration is learning some lessons that we learned in the last administration. It seemed to be making a lot of mistakes that they don't need to do.
Former Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson. Jeh, it is always good to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.